The marketplace was loud, filled with shouting traders and laughing buyers. Cages lined the dusty street, each holding aliens of different shapes and colors. Some cages were covered with cloth, some were open, showing the frightened faces inside. Slaves, bred or captured, were being sold to the highest bidder. Mating slaves, fighting slaves, pleasure slaves. The labels hung on each cage. But at the very end of the row, there was one cage that had no label, no price tag, no spotlight, just a tiny girl, sitting with her back against the metal bars. She was an alien, clearly young, no older than 14 in human years. Her skin was pale blue, covered in bruises and dirt. Her hair was silver and tangled, her tail thin like a branch. She wore a torn sheet instead of proper clothing, and on her collar, the word "reject" was burned in harsh letters. Aliens passed by, not even glancing in her direction. Some stopped only to scoff or spit near her cage. "Defective," one muttered. "She never went into heat," another sneered. "Worthless thing. Just throw her to the waste pits," a third laughed. Nobody wants a cold-blooded orphan, but someone did stop, a human, walking quietly through the market with a bag over his shoulder. His name was Mark, a traveler and mechanic who lived on the outer colonies. He wasn't looking for anyone, just spare parts, maybe a cheap translator unit. But when he reached the last cage, he paused. The alien girl didn't look up. She was used to being ignored. She was used to pain, hunger, silence, and the cold. So she stayed still, hoping he would just keep walking, but he didn't. Mark crouched down in front of the cage and studied her. He noticed how thin she was, how her hands trembled slightly. But what caught his attention were her eyes. Large, dull, but not empty. They were watching, carefully, quietly, like someone who had learned long ago not to speak first. "Why is this one still here?" Mark asked the trader nearby. The alien trader rolled his eyes. "That one? Huh, she's broken," he said, scratching his stomach. "Never went into cycle, no heat, no use. She can't breed, can't serve, can't fight. She has a name?" Mark asked. The trader shrugged. "Probably not. Her last owner dumped her years ago. Nobody wants her." Mark looked back at the girl, still silent, still watching. She was scared, not of him, but of what might come next. He stood up slowly. "How much?" The trader laughed. "You serious? You want her? You can take her for nothing. Just get her out of my inventory." Mark nodded once and placed a few credits on the table anyway. "For your trouble," he said. The trader blinked, surprised, but didn't argue. He unlocked the cage and threw the key toward Mark. "Take your little ice-cold ghost and go." The girl flinched as the cage door creaked open. Mark didn't move toward her quickly. He placed the key gently beside her. "Then step back. You can come if you want," he said, his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl's fingers moved slowly, trembling as she touched the key. She didn't look at him, not directly, but after a long pause, she crawled out of the cage, more like an animal than a person. She didn't walk upright. She didn't ask questions. She just followed him, eyes lowered, heart pounding. Mark led her to his small ship parked outside the city walls. As the door opened and warm light spilled out, she stopped. She looked at him, finally speaking, her voice dry and cracked. "You want to use me now?" Mark froze, his expression tightening. "No," he said simply. "I just didn't want to leave you in that cage." She stared at him, confused. "No use. No heat. No value," she whispered. He didn't respond. Instead, he motioned to the soft seat near the engine unit and said, "Sit, I'll get you something warm." She obeyed slowly, unsure. The ship's warmth felt strange on her skin. The silence was heavy, but peaceful. She wrapped the sheet tighter around herself, hiding her thin legs and tail. A few minutes later, Mark returned with a small steaming bowl. Soup, real soup. She sniffed it like a wild animal, unsure if it was poisoned. He sat beside her, not too close, and said, "It's not much, but it's better than cage food." She took a small sip, then another. Her eyes widened. It was good, and for the first time in years. She cried, silently, letting hot tears roll down her blue cheeks. Not because of pain, but because someone had fed her. Without asking for anything in return. She didn't understand it yet, but something had changed. She was no longer the last one in the cage. Now, she was the first to be chosen, not for her body, but for the soul someone finally saw inside her. The ship was quiet, gently humming as it floated through space. The alien girl sat on the edge of a cushioned bench, holding the empty bowl in both hands. She had eaten the soup slowly, not because it tasted bad, but because she didn't know if it was real. Food that wasn't drugged, hands that didn't hit, and a man who didn't stare at her with hunger. All of it felt like a dream she didn't trust. She looked around the ship, eyes wide and cautious. Everything was clean. Soft lights glowed along the walls, and the air smelled warm and dry. Mark was sitting across from her, fixing something on a table, something mechanical. He hadn't spoken to her again, hadn't touched her, not even once. She glanced down at her knees, then back at him. "Is this where you keep your mating slaves?" She asked quietly. Mark didn't even look up. "I don't have any slaves," he replied. The girl blinked, confused. "But I'm here," she whispered. "You bought me." Mark tightened a screw and finally looked at her. "You're not a slave," he said firmly. "I just didn't want to leave you in that cage. You're free now." The word hit her like a sharp wind. Free. It was a word she'd heard before, used in threats, used in lies. Some traitors would say, "You're free," just before throwing someone into the waste. She looked at him carefully, trying to find the trick, the trap, the mask, but his face stayed calm, kind and serious. She whispered, "I don't know what to do if I'm free." "You don't have to do anything," Mark replied. "Just eat, rest, and breathe." The girl pulled the blanket tighter around her and leaned back. Her fingers trembled, but her shoulders relaxed just a little. Later that night, as the ship drifted in autopilot, Mark gave her a small pillow and a folded blanket. He pointed to a quiet sleeping pod near the back of the ship. "You can rest here," he said. "If you need anything, I'll be right outside." She stepped into the pod, ducking her head. It was soft, warm, and it didn't smell like rust or blood. She sat there, staring at the wall, unsure how to lie down like a normal person. Eventually, she curled up and fell asleep, not from exhaustion but from safety. For the first time in her life, she didn't sleep with one eye open. The next morning, she woke up confused. No one had shouted at her, no alarm, no electric shocks, just the gentle scent of breakfast. She stepped out slowly and found Mark making something in a heating tray. He turned and smiled. "Morning," he said. She blinked, unsure how to respond, so she whispered back, "Still not going to use me?" Mark looked at her, his expression sad but not angry. "No, and I never will." She tilted her head, trying to understand. "But I'm not in heat," she said. "That's why no one wanted me." "I know," he replied, "and I don't care." She stared at him for a long time. It didn't make sense. Every creature in her species was judged by how fast they matured and when they entered mating cycles. She never had one. That's why she was thrown out. That's why she was beaten and ignored. And yet, this human cooked for her, gave her space, talked to her like she mattered. "Do humans not need heat to want?" she asked. Mark gave her a small plate and said gently, "Some do, but real caring isn't about heat. It's about choice." She sat down on the floor, her legs crossed beneath her thin frame. "I never had a choice before," she said. "They told me I was broken." Mark looked at her seriously. "You're not broken," he said. "You were just born different." She paused, staring at her fingers. "Different means worthless where I come from." "Well," he said, smiling gently, "where I come from, different usually means special." She didn't smile, but something inside her shifted. A tiny piece of the ice in her chest cracked. Over the next few days, she watched how Mark worked. He fixed wires, cleaned filters, and read old books. She started asking small questions. "What is that tool? Why does your ship make that sound? Why do you wear gloves even when it's not cold? He answered all her questions, patiently, never mocking her. She started sitting closer to him, still a few feet away, but not hiding anymore. One night, she asked softly, "Do you think I can be useful in something else, not mating?" Mark looked at her and nodded. "I think you could be anything you want. Maybe even a better pilot than me someday." She blinked, shocked. "Nobody ever said that before." He smiled. "Then let this be the first time." That night, she didn't sleep in the pod. She sat in the ship's common area, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars through the window, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a defective thing. She felt like a girl with a name she didn't know yet, a girl with a future that hadn't been written, all because one human didn't want her body. He just wanted her to feel safe. She stood in front of the mirror inside the ship's tiny washroom. Her silver hair was cleaner now, thanks to warm water and gentle shampoo. Her blue skin no longer showed dirt, but the scars were still there, thin marks down her back, along her arms, and one near her neck where the old collar had burned her. She touched her cheek, watching the reflection. This was the first time she'd seen herself properly. In the slave market, mirrors weren't allowed. Slaves weren't meant to look at themselves. They were objects, not people. But now, she was. On a ship where nobody hit her, nobody shouted at her to strip or kneel. She had her own bed, a blanket, hot soup, and strange new words to learn. Words like freedom, trust, and future. Mark was working at the front of the ship, checking the nav system. He looked over his shoulder when she stepped out of the washroom. "Looking more like yourself every day," he said with a small smile. She didn't understand the compliment, but her chest felt warm. She sat near him, her legs tucked under her. "Can I ask something?" she said in a quiet voice. "Of course," he replied. Without even looking up, she hesitated. "If I never go into heat, will that mean I'll always be alone?" Mark paused, his hand stopping mid-movement. He turned to face her slowly. "Why would you think that?" She looked down at her hands. "That's what they told me," she whispered. "That no male would ever want me. My people. We are judged by how fast we grow, how strong our instincts are. Females who go into heat early are considered high value. Those who don't get labeled defective." Mark leaned back, listening carefully. "They tried to force it," she said bitterly. "Injections, shocks, scent therapy. But nothing worked. So they stopped feeding me, said I was a waste of resources. I was thrown in the slave pit with others like me, but they all died." He stayed silent, letting her speak. She clenched her fists. "They used to say, 'She's cold, she's empty, she's a broken breed.'" Her voice cracked at the last word. "And I started to believe it." Mark finally spoke. "You're not broken," he said quietly. "You were just born in the wrong place, around the wrong people." She looked up, eyes filled with questions. "But if my biology isn't right, then how can I ever be chosen?" Mark gave her a gentle look. "You don't need to be in heat to be loved," he said. "And you don't need to be chosen. You can choose too." She had never thought about it that way, all her life. Others had made decisions for her, what to eat, when to speak, where to sit. She had never been asked what she wanted. Later that day, she sat in the engine bay while Mark worked. He was teaching her the names of tools and how to identify loose wires. She watched with sharp eyes, repeating every word he said. He didn't treat her like a child or a pet. He treated her like a student, and that made her feel proud. As the days passed, something inside her began to change, not her body but her mind. She started to sit closer, ask more questions. She even began to laugh softly when Mark made jokes. One night, she caught herself watching him as he worked. His hands were strong, his eyes focused, his voice calm. Her heart thumped louder than usual. She quickly looked away, confused. What was that feeling? It wasn't fear, it wasn't instinct, it was something warmer. She whispered to herself, "If this is not heat, then what is it?" That evening, she sat with him at dinner. "Can I tell you something strange?" she asked. Mark nodded. "Go ahead, I think." "I like being here," she said. Almost like a secret, Mark smiled. "That's not strange at all." She looked around the room, at the soft lights and the humming walls. "I've never liked anywhere before." She added, "You're safe here," he said. "That's what makes the difference." She hesitated, then looked him straight in the eye. "If I stay here long enough, will I become more human?" Mark chuckled gently. "You'll always be who you are," he said. "But maybe you'll discover parts of yourself that no one let you explore before. Not human, not alien, just you." She nodded slowly, feeling that warmth in her chest again. Not heat, not desire, just connection. For the first time, she wasn't trying to survive. She was trying to live. And in the quiet of that starship, a girl once labeled worthless was starting to understand her value. Not because of what her body could do, but because of who she was and who she was becoming. Asterisk. The stars outside the ship shimmered like quiet lanterns. Inside, the girl was learning how to connect wires. Her hands steady now. Mark watched her from across the room, impressed. She had learned quickly, faster than any student he had trained before. She didn't talk much, but every question she asked was sharp, focused. Mark had even given her a name. He asked if she remembered her old one, but she didn't, so he called her Lyra. When he first said it, she didn't respond, but later, when he whispered it again, she turned her head slowly and whispered back, "Lyra." It sounded strange in her mouth, but she liked it. She had never had anything that was hers. Now she had a name. But peace never lasts in the dark corners of the galaxy. 2 days later, a transmission was picked up by the ship. Mark read the screen, his face darkening. It was from the local planetary guild. "One of your passengers is marked as genetically tagged property. Return or face consequences." Lyra was in the engine room, cleaning a panel, when Mark walked in. He looked serious, more serious than she had ever seen him. She stood up quickly, thinking she had broken something. I didn't mean to." "It's not that," Mark interrupted gently. He explained the message, choosing his words carefully. Her hands dropped to her sides, her body stiffened. "They want me back," she said flatly. Mark nodded. "They're sending a retrieval squad in 2 hours," she laughed bitterly. "So I'm still owned." "No," Mark said firmly. "Not while I'm breathing." She looked up at him in shock. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "They'll punish you, maybe even kill you." Mark didn't blink. "They don't scare me," he said. "You're not going back." She turned away, pacing in panic. "You don't understand. They're powerful. They'll destroy your ship." Mark placed a hand on the wall, leaning close to her. "Then we'll be gone before they get here." But they weren't fast enough. A sleek black ship appeared on the radar faster than expected. It locked onto them before they could jump to hyperspace. Lyra stood frozen as alarms flashed red inside the ship. Mark grabbed a pulse rifle from the cabinet, his hands steady. "Go to the back bay. Lock the door. Stay down," he ordered, but she didn't move. "I won't hide," she said. "This is because of me." "That doesn't matter," Mark replied. "Your life matters. Go." For a moment, she saw something in his eyes, not fear, not anger, but protection. She obeyed, running toward the back as he prepared for the docking breach. When the alien squad burst through the outer lock, they weren't wearing military uniforms. They were bounty contractors, cold-eyed, armored, and armed with stun rods and restraints. "We've come for the defective," their leader said. Mark raised his weapon. "She's not going anywhere." They laughed. "Why protect something that can't even breed?" One of them mocked. Mark's voice dropped. "Because she's more human than you." The fight was fast and brutal. Mark was strong but outnumbered. He held his ground, injuring 2 of them, but was eventually pushed back as they stormed toward the back of the ship. Lyra was waiting, not with a weapon, but with something better. She had rerouted the power in the corridor. When the bounty hunters entered the narrow hall, she flipped the switch. The metal walls burst with electric current. Dropping 3 attackers to the floor, Mark saw the smoke and grinned. Blood on his lip. "You do learn fast." He coughed. Lyra ran to him, helping him up. "I'm not going back," she said with fire in her eyes. "Good," Mark replied. "Because I'm not letting you." Together, they dragged the unconscious aliens into the airlock. Mark launched the pod into space with a cold push of a button. The last thing they heard was the bounty leader screaming through the comms. "You'll regret this, human. She belongs to us." Mark leaned against the wall, breathing hard. His shirt was torn, blood running down his side. Lyra stared at the red liquid in horror. "You're hurt because of me," she whispered. Mark wiped his face with a cloth and looked at her. "No," he said. "I'm hurt because some people think others are objects." "And I do it again," Lyra trembled. Not from fear, but from something else. She knelt down beside him and took his hand. "I've never had anyone fight for me," she whispered. Mark squeezed her fingers gently. "Well," he said with a tired smile, "get used to it." That night, while Mark rested, Lyra sat beside him. Her heart beat fast, not because of danger, but because she had chosen not to run. She had chosen to protect someone who protected her, and for the first time, she didn't feel like property. She felt like a partner. The silence after the fight was louder than any weapon. The ship floated through empty space, its engines humming low. Inside, Mark lay on the medical cot, bandages wrapped around his ribs. He wasn't in danger anymore, but his body needed rest. Lyra sat beside him, her small hands resting on her knees. Her eyes never left his face. Every rise and fall of his chest felt like a promise, a reminder that he was still alive. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she cleaned the ship, repaired the wires damaged in the attack, and prepared food, though her cooking was simple and clumsy. When Mark finally opened his eyes the next morning, the first thing he saw was her curled up in a chair, her silver hair falling over her shoulder, her tail tucked around her legs like a blanket. He smiled weakly. "You stayed up again." Lyra opened her eyes slowly, surprised to hear his voice. She stood and walked over carefully. "You almost died," she said, her voice sharp but full of worry. "You shouldn't have done that for someone like me." Mark shook his head. "I'd do it again," he whispered, "because you're not someone like you. You're Lyra." She looked away, her throat tight. No one had ever said her name like that, like it meant something. She reached out and gently touched the edge of his bandage. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Her hand trembled, but not from fear. "Your heart," she whispered suddenly. "It's slower than mine," Mark chuckled softly. "Humans have slower beats." Lyra placed her fingers over her own chest. Hers was fast, too fast. Later, while he rested, she sat in front of the mirror again. She stared at her reflection for a long time. Her skin was cleaner now, her eyes clearer, but something deeper had changed. She was no longer looking for a master. She was wondering who she wanted to be, and more strangely, she was thinking about Mark, his voice, his laugh, the way he looked at her like she was a real person, not a tool, not a slave, not something to be used or discarded. Her hand moved to her chest again. Why was her heart beating so fast whenever he was close? This wasn't heat. She knew what that was supposed to feel like. This was different. She didn't feel wild or desperate or out of control. She felt shy, curious, nervous, and warm. That evening, she brought Mark a fresh meal and sat beside him. He was recovering quickly, thanks to the med packs. "Did you eat?" he asked her. She nodded. "You should rest too," he said. "I will," she replied. After this, there was a quiet pause between them. Then she spoke again, softly. "Mark, do humans ever feel this strange thing where your heart speeds up around someone?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "Like excitement?" She shook her head. "No. Like you can't breathe for a second, and you don't know what to say, and your chest feels heavy, but in a good way." He studied her for a moment. "That sounds a lot like falling in love." Her breath caught. "Love?" she repeated. "Yes," he said gently. It's not always loud or passionate or physical. Sometimes it's soft, like a whisper inside you. When you care about someone more than yourself. She looked down at her hands. I thought only mating partners had love. Mark smiled. No, Lyra, he said. Love isn't just about mating. It's about trust, kindness, loyalty. About wanting someone to be happy, even if they never give you anything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said in a small voice, I think I'm feeling that, but I don't know. If I'm allowed to, you don't need permission. Mark said, your feelings are yours, not something anyone can take or judge. She reached over slowly, fingers barely brushing his. Then, can I stay close to you? Mark turned his hand over and gently held hers. Yes, Lyra, he said, always. They didn't speak after that. There were no grand declarations, no mating rituals or instinctual urges. Just two hands gently holding each other, and two hearts, one human, one alien beating quietly in the dark. Lyra went to sleep that night with a smile on her face. Not because someone chose her, but because this time she had chosen him, and her heart kept whispering the same word over and over. Love, asterisk. The ship was quiet again, but not because of fear or silence. This time, it was calm like the stillness after a storm. Lyra was humming softly as she organized the tools in the engine room. She had memorized every part of the ship by now. Every wire, every circuit, every switch. Mark had healed enough to walk without support. But he still winced sometimes, every time he did. Lyra was there helping without being asked. Her movements were gentle, her eyes always watching. Not with fear, but with care. That morning, as Mark adjusted the NAV control, a quiet message blinked on the screen. A nearby human medical station was open for visitors. Mark paused, then looked over at Lyra. Want to take a short detour? He asked. She blinked, confused. Why? I want you to get checked, he said. A real medical scan, not from those monsters who called you broken. Lyra stiffened. She remembered the cold labs, the metal tables, the injections that burned under her skin. Are they going to hurt me again? She whispered. Mark knelt beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. No one will touch you unless you say yes, he promised. And I'll be with you the whole time. It took some convincing, but Lyra finally agreed, not because she believed the doctors would help, but because she trusted him. The medical station was clean, bright, and run by kind voices. No collars, no shouting, no restraints. The nurse who scanned Lyra's body was gentle and respectful. They took her DNA, ran advanced diagnostics, and asked quiet questions. Mark stayed right beside her, holding her hand through it all. After an hour, the doctor returned with the results. And what he said changed everything. She was tampered with, the doctor explained, showing them the scan. Her reproductive cycle was chemically suppressed on purpose. Lyra's eyes widened in shock. What? She breathed. The doctor nodded. Her people wanted to slow her growth, he said. It looks like they experimented on her before puberty. They used blockers, genetic silence treatments to prevent her heat from ever activating. Mark clenched his fists. Why? He asked. Likely to control her, the doctor said. Some species do it to keep certain females docile or compliant. She wasn't effective. The doctor added softly. She was designed to appear that way. Lyra's legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the floor. Everything hit her at once. The beatings, the cages, the cold words. Broken, worthless, reject. All lies, all because they wanted to control her and threw her away when it didn't work. I was never broken. She whispered. No, Mark said, kneeling beside her. You were betrayed. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not because of sadness but rage. Years of pain had been built on a lie. They made her hate herself for something they did. Mark gently lifted her chin. Listen to me, he said firmly. This doesn't change who you are, it only proves how strong you've been. You survived all that, and you still have a heart that can love. You're not defective. Lyra, you're extraordinary. She sobbed into his shoulder, her body trembling. But it wasn't from fear this time. It was release later. When they returned to the ship, she sat quietly by the window. Her eyes were still wet, but her voice was stronger. "Do you think I'll ever feel what I was meant to feel?" she asked. Mark sat beside her. "Maybe," he said, "but you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You're not a tool. You're not a product. You're you, Lyra." She looked at him for a long moment, then asked softly, "What if the feelings I already have are stronger than heat ever could be?" Mark didn't speak. Instead, he reached out and took her hand. No pressure, no pulling, just presence. "I believe they are," he said. That night Lyra didn't cry. She wrote her name on a small panel inside the ship, next to Mark's, for the first time. She believed she deserved to exist, not because of her body, not because of what she could give, but because someone finally saw her, all of her, and that changed everything. The stars outside shimmered like diamonds on black velvet. Mark's ship floated in quiet orbit over a peaceful moon. Inside, the soft hum of machines blended with the warmth of something new, something that wasn't just survival anymore. It was peace. Lyra stood at the window, her arms folded across her chest. Her reflection looked stronger, now shoulders straighter, eyes brighter. She wasn't that trembling girl in a cage anymore. She was free, she had a name, she had a choice, and now she had a question in her heart she couldn't ignore any longer. Mark was in the main room, working quietly. His shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, and a tool was tucked behind his ear. He looked up as Lyra entered. "You need something?" he asked kindly. She walked closer but didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat across from him, took a slow breath, and said, "I want to talk." Mark nodded, setting his tools aside. "Always," he said. Lyra's voice was soft but steady. "When I was in that cage, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd die with no name, no family, no worth. You changed that." Mark didn't speak, letting her continue. "You didn't want my body. You didn't ask for anything," she said. "You just gave. And now I feel something I don't fully understand." Mark leaned in slightly, his expression calm and open. "What do you feel?" Lyra swallowed hard, her fingers gripping her knees. "When I see you, my chest feels warm," she said. "When you speak, I listen. When you hurt, I want to protect you. And when you laugh, I want it to never stop." Mark smiled. Gently. "That's not heat," she added quickly. "It's not instinct. It's choice." Mark placed his hand gently on the table between them. "You're not alone," he said, "because I feel that too. I didn't save you out of pity. I stayed because I care." Lyra reached out and touched his hand slowly. Their fingers wrapped together like puzzle pieces. "I don't know if I'll ever go into heat," she said, "and maybe I'll never be able to give you what other females could." Mark squeezed her hand. "I don't want what they could give," he said. "I want what you are willing to share. I don't love you for what your body can do. I love you because you're you, Lyra." She trembled slightly, eyes wet with quiet tears. No one had ever said that to her, not even close. Not, "You're useful," not, "You're beautiful," but "You're you." She stood slowly and walked around the table. Then, without asking, she sat beside him and rested her head against his shoulder. "I want to be with you," she whispered. "No masters, no owners, no contracts, just us." Mark gently rested his cheek against her hair. "That's all I've ever wanted," he whispered back. They stayed like that for a long time. No loud promises, no dramatic scenes. Just two souls resting in each other's presence. Later that evening, Mark handed her something wrapped in cloth. Lyra opened it carefully, revealing a small metal tag with her name engraved. "Lyra," it read. On the back it said, "Chosen, not owned." Her hands trembled as she looked up at him. "It's not a collar," Mark explained. "It's a reminder that no one owns you, not now, not ever again." Lyra smiled, really smiled. She placed the tag around her neck, wearing it proudly like a badge of honor. The next morning, as the ship prepared to jump into deep space, Lyra sat in the co-pilot seat. Her feet rested up on the edge, her eyes focused on the stars. Mark leaned over, smirking. "You ready to choose the next destination?" Lyra grinned. "I thought you were the captain." He laughed softly. "I was," he said. "But I think I'm ready to hand the controls over to someone braver." She blinked, surprised. "Braver?" "Yes," he said. "Someone who came out of a cage and still chose love. Someone who was told she was broken and still found the courage to dream." Lyra's eyes sparkled as she whispered, "Then let's go somewhere new." And so they did, not as master and slave, not as protector and orphan, but as partners, as equals, as two hearts that had learned what it meant to choose each other freely in a galaxy that had rejected her. One human had accepted her, not for what she lacked, but for the love she was never taught to give. Now she gave it fully, and he received it without condition. Together, they were whole,